This is the Coast Artillery Museum, and we'll go up here and see what it's all about. It's starting to rain, so it's probably a good time to go indoors.
Flying open.
Good.
Welcome.
Admiral Worden's claim to fame is he was the captain of the Monitor during the Civil War, one of the very first ironclad steam-powered warships with a mobile turret on top, so he can fire 360 degrees. He has 11 degrees of elevation. He can go 5 degrees below level, versus the Virginia class. They had the old-style pirate cannons. They've got to reel them in, load them, reel them back out. He's only got 6 degrees of elevation and nothing below level. It takes him 2 miles to turn around, 1.5 times his boat length. So he was a lot more maneuverable. Then in 1897 is when they started the construction of the 3 forts. There was Fort Flagler, Fort Worden, and Fort Casey. And they create a triangle of fire to protect the entrance to Puget Sound, because the big thing was Bremerton Naval Shipyard, which is the oldest, largest naval shipyard. They had to protect it. So when they started this project, they didn't have cars, trucks, tractors, and bulldozers. Men with picks and shovels, horses and mules, and they hand dug all of the emplacements. The only modern convenience they had were 2 narrow gauge steam trains, and they used mining ore carts to haul the concrete from the mixing plant to the forms to pour it. All of the concrete for all 3 forts came from Belgium, in 400-pound wooden barrels in the bottom of sailing ships. The first of the guns to go in were the big mortar pits. That's because the mortars can fire 360 degrees, thus protecting the back of the fort in case of a land invasion, where the main guns can only fire out over the water. So they've got these in by 1902, and the first troops arrived. But there's no place for them to stay yet. So they spent the first 2 years in tents behind the main gun line and over here by Alexander's Castle, in the wind and the rain and the snow. But by 1904, they'd completed Barracks Row, Officers Row, and most of NCO Row. So they got to move inside. Still don't have electricity yet. That's a few more years down the road. So then you get to 1909, 1910. They put Battery Kinsey down on the water because they discovered a flaw in the main gun line, that in the fall when the fog sets, it sets directly on top of the main gun line. You can't see from the spotting towers over the water to find your targets. So they put Battery Kinsey low on the water to get below the fog line and still have the line of sight. Then 1911, they get the powerhouse up and running. It's DC power in those days. AC doesn't take over out here until well after World War I. This is some of the circuitry from the original light. That's one of the toolboxes they used to build the fort. No DeWalt tools in there. They're all cordless, but all hand operated. Then you get to 1917, they start the build up to World War I, manning up the forts. Then you get to the beginning of World War II. This piece of cable down here with all these hoops and the stars and all of the buoys you see down in the lower campground was part of a giant net that started at Fort Flagler, stretched 4 miles across the channel. It's Point Wilson. That was an anti-submarine, anti-torpedo net to protect Indian Island. Indian Island to this day is the largest naval weapons depot on the West Coast. They take their little rock real serious over there. Do not rent a kayak at Fort Flagler and try to paddle to their beach. It does not end well. Now, the Barracas buildings is where they had all the senior officers for all the guns in one building on top of the mountain in a huge clearing. What could go wrong? Well, airplanes have come along now and can drop things on you. Maybe this is not a good idea. So the Navy comes in and they build the Harbor Entrance Command Post. It's underground, it's bomb-proof, it's gas-proof, it's got blowers, scrubbers, and everything in there. And they're in charge of tracking all vessels coming and going from the harbor. During the Second World War, when we were at our height, we had 4,200 troops stationed here. We're 3 times the size of Port Townsend. We're the city within the city. Then, by 47, the last of the big guns came out and were basically cut up for scrap metal. They'd outlived their usefulness. Then, during the Korean conflict, they used the beach down here next to the pier to bring the landing craft in, load up the troops, shoot the 4 miles across to Fort Flagler, and practice storming the beach. When those troops finished their training, they're the ones that went to Seoul, South Korea for the invasion of Incheon Harbor. In 53, the fort was closed as a military installation. But the Navy and the Army hung out for a few more years. The Navy continued to operate the Harbor Entrance Command Post until almost 1960, when the Coast Guard took over those duties. In mid-50s, the Army came back out and installed the very first long-range radar on top of Battery Benson. And that was for the Nike, Ajax, and Hercules missiles of the Cold War era. We did not launch the missiles from here. That was done at Fort Lawton in Seattle. We just told the missiles what to shoot at. Then in 57, this building was converted to a diagnostic treatment service center. That's a politically correct way of saying juvenile detention facility. Thus, we have little tiny 6-inch square windows instead of the 4-panel slider windows, so little monsters couldn't escape. And I have jail cells in the back for the really rowdy ones. Now, this is doctor's medical kit. Doctors had to be the general practitioner, he had to be the surgeon, he had to be the dentist, he had to be the pharmacist, and he had to double up as the veterinarian. How'd you like to have that guy work on you? This is the entire brigade assembled on the parade ground getting ready to go get on the boats. One of the interesting things we found in the duty log is the day before the entire brigade got there, they had to mow the lawn. So they took 15 guys from the duty section, lined them up shoulder to shoulder with the old steel push mowers, forward march. Chunk, 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 chunk. We had an abundance of manpower and very little equipment. This comes from the 1930s. This is one of the operator stations. This is the one that was up underneath the Barracas building in another underground bomb-proof, gas-proof chamber. This is how they communicated to Fort Flagler, Fort Worden, Fort Casey, and all the outlying stations. This is fully restored. We could hook it up to power and still operate it today. Really interesting old map. Circuit 1942. Put out by the Union Pacific Railroad. Okay, the railroad thought it was a really good idea to tell all the soldiers, sailors, Marines how to get from point A to point B on their railroad. Problem, it's 1942. We're at war with both Germany and Japan, but everything marked in red on that map was every single military base in the continental United States. Needless to say, the War Department was not real pleased with the railroad. And they were told in no uncertain terms that if you do not immediately recall and destroy these maps, you will be charged with treason, taken out and shot. Thus came the posters of the Second World War, because the railroad thought they had a better idea. We got lucky and found these in a footlocker that had been shipped to us. There's probably not more than 200 of them left in existence. Score!
Yeah.
During the Second World War, when we were at our height, We had 4,200 troops stationed here. We had everything here that they would have had in town. We had our own churches, pastors, choirs, music, books, magazines, newsletters, all printed here on the base. We were a city within the city. We had a well-stocked PX. You can still buy hankies and pillows like this at any military base today. The only difference is some of my stuff's over 100 years old. Colonel Whistler, one of the early commanding officers, 1906 to 1908. He was a bit of a peacock. He liked the fancy gold sleeves. He liked the shoulder boards. He liked the egg salad on the hat, but he wasn't big in military haircuts. He sticks out like a sore thumb in all the old photos. Side note, his cousin was the one that painted Whistler's mother, same Whistler family. This is one of the original 1904 beds when they first moved into the building. He still had quartermaster seals top and bottom. If you got here fresh out of boot, you got 2 blankets, a pillow, and everything you owned lived in that box at the foot of your bed. Once you'd been here 4, maybe 5 years, got some stripes on your sleeve, you could have a locker and move your bed next to one of the windows that opened and closed. You was uptown then. 1920s. We now have electric lights in the building, but we're still wearing World War I battle helmets, leggings, because you're still dealing with horses and mules. We didn't get our first truck till after World War I. Didn't get a bulldozer till the 1930s. Then you get into World War II through the Korean conflict, more recognizable uniforms. The barracks were their home. Everything took place in the barracks. The barracks had a barber shop, they had a tailor shop, they had a game room with a couple of pool tables, they had places upstairs they could read and write letters home. Rifle racks were every 20 beds upstairs. The little green bench you see there, that was what they sat at the dining room tables. The little knob underneath, that was what you put your hat on to keep it off the table and off the floor. Now, during the Second World War, this was considered an ideal duty station. They had everything out here you would have had in town. We had our own books, magazines, newspapers, all of that was printed on the base. We had a barber shop, we had a movie theater, a bowling alley, tennis courts. We had all the comforts of home, and nobody was actually shooting at you. That made this a pretty good duty station. Now, this is the signal light that the Navy used up on top of the harbor entrance command post to identify all vessels coming and going. These were carbon arc rod fired, so they didn't have light bulbs that bright. So these 2 carbon arc rods produced the light. They could signal ships by Morse code, but most of the time they liked to maintain radio silence, so they would use these. Didn't get the right response back from the ship, they could lock onto the target, narrow the beam, widen the beam, and they called out the big boys. These were the big 60-inch guns. They rolled out on railroad tracks and turned nighttime into daytime. 1914, they were having a baseball game at Fort Casey. It started to get dark. They turned on all the 60-inch spotlights from here. They turned on all the 60-inch spotlights from Flagler. They pointed them at Fort Casey, and they completed their first night baseball game.
Wow.
The Army knew what was important around.
Crazy.
That's part of the first radar array. This was us out here. This is Fort Lawton in Seattle, which is now Discovery Park.
Okay.
And they were the missile launch command. We just told them what to shoot at. But they were the ones that actually would have launched. These were the missile silos throughout the Pacific Northwest for the Nike, Ajax, and Hercules missiles of the early Cold War era. This is one of the cook stoves off NCO Road. This is about a 1906 version. These were built under special contract for the Army. Now this one would have sat about 4 inches higher than it is right now. We took the 4 legs off because it's too hard on my 100-year-old floor. But these had their care and feeding instructions cast right into them. So the wives would know how to take care of an Army stove, because the Army wants it back in good condition at the end of your tour of duty. We can hook this back to the stack, fill it with coal, and still operate it today. Some of the dishes over the time frame life of the fort. The QMD is the very early days, and you get to the Second World War and the Korean conflict. The dishes themselves did not change much over the years. Old bottle of ketchup. Before it was ketchup. It was ketchup. This is before 1911, because it still has the oil lantern hanging on the ceiling. It's also, we know, it's a Sunday, because there's an officer in dress uniform. The only time they were ever in the building was on Sundays, when one was invited as a guest for dinner. Now, during the holidays, they went all out. They got the best of everything. This is Christmas 1916, and that is this room. That's that post right there. That's the doorway where you see the Merry Christmas sign. This wall was added in 57 when the detention facility. It goes all the way back to where the original galley was, which is now my workshop. Now, these are some of the menus. This is the one I was telling you about earlier, where it's got the swastikas on it. That's because in those days the swastikas were not evil. They were still peace, love, and goodwill. Didn't change till 39 when Hitler took over, rotated it, and changed the meaning, and they quickly fell from history and were never used again. This is Christmas 1941, 10 days after the war started. So you can imagine what they were talking about at the dinner table, but when you look down the menu, they ate very, very well. Right down to cigars and cigarettes after dinner. But where it says Loganberry Punch, don't smoke around it. About 190 proof. You gotta remember, during Prohibition, this was a super highway. You're only 40 miles from Canada. So bootleggers are heading for Seattle. How do they get by the forts and all of these lights? That was easy. Stand up on the bow with a keg of whiskey over your head, wait for the lights to hit you, throw it over the side. You paid the toll, move it on down the line.
Somebody goes and picks it up later.
Yep. This is Battery Kinsey down on the water. If you go up into that top room where these two guys are standing, you'll still see a bunch of steel tubes that look like big electrical conduits.
We were up there.
Those were voice tubes to haul around to the powder room, shell rooms, and elevators to tell them what to send up. Spotting scope, tracking scope, range finder. Over here is a ladder. That ladder dropped down to the room directly below it. Those guys were sitting around the table talking to Fort Casey, Fort Flagler, and all of the outlying stations. Now, it's fun to bring the kids in here today and say, okay, I have a ship inbound at 13 knots, I've got a 7-knot tag going outbound. Winds out of the south-southeast at 15, gusting to 20. Calculate, triangulate, give me the coordinates to fire so that the ship and the shell are in the same place at the same time. They all whip in their pockets and pull out their cell phones, and I go, they didn't have any of that. Pencils, rulers, and slide rules. Things they had to consider in those days. Curvature of the earth at a given distance. They have to know what the temperature of the gunpowder is. They have to know what the relative humidity is. They have to know what the outside air temperature is, because that all affects rate of burn. Rate of burn equals velocity. Velocity equals distance. So they had a slide chart like this to help. They had 4 minutes to do all of this. Were they good at it? You betcha. Fort Flagler in 1915 set the world record. They had 5 out of 5 moving daytime targets at over 6,000 yards. They had 4 out of 5 nighttime targets, and 1 miss was a near miss. So they were really, really good at it. Now, this shows you Fort Flagler, Fort Worden, and Fort Casey, thus the Triangle of Fire. This is the only deep water channel into the Puget Sound. You can't get to Bremerton, Everett, Seattle, Tacoma, Olympia, so on and so forth without going by here. So, the only exception to that was Deception Pass. But you can't get a big warship through there. It's too narrow and the tides were too swift. But just in case they had tried to send torpedo boats, that little rock you see on the inland side called Goat Island was Fort Whitman. They had 4 6-inch disappearing guns to cover 800 yards. Weren't sneaking through there. You had a big gun at Fort Eden. You had all the Canadian forts, plus Camp Hyde and Angel Point. So if the Japanese fleet would have tried to come in, they'd have had to run the gauntlet. If they survived that, they had to turn around and do it again. Nobody ever tried. It was pretty much a suicide mission. Now, today, all the kids go, well, none of that's there anymore, easy peasy. You just sail right on in. You run. We still have Whidbey Island Naval Air Station at Oak Harbor. The time an FA-18 goes wheels up to here is 1 minute and 47 seconds.
Wow.
They have more firepower under the wings and all of that combined. Already, we have 2 types of main guns. We have barbette guns and disappearing guns. This model, the only time this gun is ever in this position as it fires. When it fires, the recoil brought the gun back down to the loading position. Shell gun rolls up, puts the projectile in.
The shell is a 2.5 pound powder charge.
Then both bags of powder can be loaded simultaneously instead of one at a time.
Here you
Also
can see another
loaded
reason why the disappearance valve rate of fire is
close the breech, set your elevation, traverse it,
jammed at once.
release it, the gun comes up, fires, and starts all over. Well-trained crew fire almost 3 rounds. This guy is not sighting the gun. He's telling you where the shell is hitting. Just to turn.
Maximum elevation is 12 degrees.
This is the shell that the 10-inch gun is firing. Like the 2 guns in Fort Casey. This is the shells. I love bringing the kids back here and say, if you pick it up, take it out the door, it's yours.
Yeah,
It's
good
only
luck.
510 pounds. Okay, the largest projectiles we had were the 12-inch. The mortars fired 12-inch, Battery Kinsey fired 12-inch. They weighed anywhere from 970 to 1140, depending on whether they were armor-piercing, high-explosive, incendiary, or fragmentation. Now that's just a wooden replica of one because I can't fit 1,000 pounds.
I was gonna say.
without winding up in the basement. Everything else is the real weights. It was a job getting the 200 pounder up there. The powder was mixed, put into silk bags. The silk bags were placed into the canisters. Meat thermometer looking thing, which was the temperature, was placed into the top bag, sealed, and those were stored in the powder magazines. If you're down at Battery Kinsey and you're trying to figure out which were powder magazines, which were shell magazines, when you look at the overhead, the ones with the tracks were for the big shells. They were too big to hoist. Man,
battery
So,
branch. They
have
have
train.
model 1890 M1 12-inch.
where the powder bags, they could
There are
just open the
16
can, pull the
mortars
bag
designed
out,
on
and
the
that
fort
goes
to
into
make
that secondary elevator, the smaller.
The mortars fired their
So
rounds
silk
closer to
bags,
vertical
powder.
so that when they
They
reached
used
their
silk
target, they were coming
instead
almost
of
straight
burlap.
down.
That's
This
because
was
silk
good
burns
because most of
completely.
the warships of the
hot
period,
burns.
while armored
Want
on
to be
the
loading
side,
another
still
200
only
pounds
had
of
one
powder
deck.
and have a hot spark.
Carriage and barrel
Right.
together
Spoiled your day.
were